Hello, and welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. This is the Conversations with Playwrights and Theatre-Makers on art, life, playwriting, theatre making, and the world, not necessarily in that order, from the Lucille Lortel Theater. My name is Caridad Svich. I am the Artistic Director of the Alcove, the Play Development Program. I'm also a playwright, theatre maker. So I have a vested interest in this subject. And I usually start by doing a brief audio description, and then I'll introduce our guest for today. So I am a fair-skinned person with brownish auburnish hair. It's pulled up, and I have bangs, though. They're fluffy bangs on my forehead. And I have brown eyes. I'm wearing red lipstick. Today I'm not wearing my cat eye glasses. I'm wearing my round glasses that are perched on the edge of my nose, but they have tortoise shell. You might be able to see that. I'm wearing a top that is, how should I describe it? A black background with lots of flowers, tons of flowers on them, very small flowers though, not big flowers, of various colors, predominantly pink and yellow and blue. I have very thin blue headphones on, stringy kind. Behind me is a white background, and you might see the outline just in the corner of a lamp, which is not turned on at the moment. And today's guest is the wonderful, multi-hyphenate, extraordinarily talented Rudi Goblen. I'll read from their website, their bio. Rudi is a playwright, educator, and performer who creates solo theater and devised theater work. As a dancer, he has toured nationally, internationally, competing, adjudicating, and teaching with his award-winning group, Flipside Kings. Rudi is the recipient of the Vineyard Theater Colman Domingo Award, a 3-time winner of playwriting awards from the Kennedy Center, the Lorraine Hansberry Playwriting Award, and an O'Neill finalist. His accolades include a Future Aesthetics Artist Award, 2 Miami-Dade County Choreographer Awards, a Feast Award for his book of poetry. The book is called A Bag of Halos and Horns, and a Theater Master's Take 10 Playwright Honor. He has trained and worked with Cirque du Soleil and Deviate Physical Theater. I didn't know that, and I want to know all about that. And is a founding member of the Miami-based companies Teo Castellano D Projects and Rosy Herrera Dance Theater. Many, many other things to talk about, but then we'll spend all day talking about his bio and not to Rudi. So welcome, Rudi, and thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm excited to hop in and chat with you. One of the first time we met, we chatted on the phone. Actually,
we did.
I loved. Hi everyone. My name is Rudi Goblen. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a Taurus sun, a Libra moon, and a Cancer rising. I am in my hotel room in Indianapolis, where I'm working on a show that I'm directing. It's called, we could talk about that. I'm wearing a blue denim shirt that is layered over a black t-shirt. I have a dark brown beard. I am a brown Latinx man. I have a yellowish, kind of mustardish beanie on my head. And there is a hotel room behind me that consists of gray and red carpet and gray curtains. And over my left shoulder is a lamp that you will also see behind me.
Cool. It is a very gray room, can I just say? It's like extraordinarily so, quite surprising. Oh, my heavens. Well, welcome, Rudi, and thanks for doing an audio description. I really appreciate that. So for those of you who follow the series, I always start with the same question, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the only question of the moment, to be honest, because it affects every single thing, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice, its thinking, its making, and shaping it in the world?
Yeah, I love this question. Thank you for asking it. It makes me think about how lucky I've been on the journey. Not only as a human being on this planet, but as an artist as well. I think that the way I create theater is very intertwined with who I am as a human, and who I've been as a human, how I was raised as a human. So I grew up very poor, and saw my mother improvise every day, you know, taking whatever ingredients and whatever we had in a refrigerator to make a full course meal. I saw my mother, you know, gather different different parts of different carpets that she can order from friends, like sew together to create one big carpet so that we had carpet in our living room, right? I'm of the hip hop culture. You know, I am an MC, a dancer, a graffiti artist, and so I grew up in that culture, and that culture is all about, you know, making something out of nothing. Um, you know, doing things and using those things to create a bigger thing. And so, and you know, we're talking about people who were also living a very specific way, people who created hip hop in late 60s, early 70s, right? People who were turning abandoned buildings into places where they organized, turning abandoned buildings into places where people had parties. You know, people who figured out how to how to tap into the electricity freely and use parks to create events for the community. You know, dancers who used cardboard and pieces of linoleum to lay on the floor and dance, and where that floor was laid over with where the event took place, right? Which I think is very much like, is so like rooted in my practice as a theater artist, right? It's also like very, you think about it, very Brooke, you know, like touring with his company, and they just roll out the rug, and the actors, once the actors step onto the rug, it's where the theater is created, you know. So when I finally got into theater after years of being, you know, a hip hop practitioner, a dancer, a writer, a poet, an MC, a street performer, you know, I met Teo Castellanos, who was my first teacher, and Teo Castellanos is very much of the, you know, less is best, minimalism, and devised new work, right? And so I came into theater in that very same way, and you were always figuring out how to do it. We were always figuring out ways of making the thing happen without having access to support, access to resources, access to spaces, and so I think that all of that has prepared me for what I think most people are probably experiencing the first time, or experiencing in a way that they've ever experienced. And so I'm kind of, it's already just been in my practice to create in that way, with lack of resources and lack of support, and figure out how to make the thing, right? When I found, again, when I came into theater, I was already, you know, being taught how to raise funds, how to write a grant, how to like, how to think of like alternative performance spaces, right? Keeping in mind that, you know, not everyone is going to support the kind of work that you're doing. And how do you create the work that you want to create with the people you want to create it with? And what are all the different ideas we can come up with as a community, or as a company, or as collaborators to make that work happen, with those barricades and with all those with all that limitness, right? So I don't know. So to answer your question, I don't know how much it is affecting the way I create work, because it's always been the same for me. Yeah, and so like that, I'm well prepared in that way. I'm also someone who believes that every show, every play should be able to be done in a backyard or in a parking lot, right? And that's the kind of theater I like to make. I love the spectacle, and I love the support, and I love the resources, and I'm always thinking about, well, then what if we had to do this in a school for students? What if we had to do this in an art gallery? What if we had to do this in a, you know, auditorium, or in a gym at a college, or What if the main theater we're in, something happens and now we have to do it in the basement in the small black box that only fit 80 people as opposed to 300, right? So always that thinking has always been part of my creating process.
Yeah, that's amazing, and thanks for walking us through that. I think that I want to complicate the question just a little bit, which is to say that a couple of things. So one of them has to do with the fact that as a writer, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, and I don't know if other writers are feeling this, so I'll put it out there. We write sometimes and we say things like, it's spring, it's summer, the characters are wearing this, blah, blah, blah. They do these kind of things. This is how they behave. And we know that that's no longer true, right? So the spring that was the spring is no longer the spring anymore. The summer is now, exponentially hot, and also more hurricanes and more floods. And this is just going to keep happening because of the greed that is dominating our geopolitics. And I guess that for me, as a writer, I find myself, and I don't know if you find this, Rudi, like I'm facing the page and I'm going, normally I'd be like, so this happens, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly I'm going, oh, wait, I can't, but also I can't think that way. And two, I have to rethink that. And also two, because I think a lot of theater making is about projecting into the future. I think that's part of our practice, is that we make things that are about the now or the past, but we're always looking forward. Somehow we're trying to sort of imagine. And that imagining is taking a different shape, right? Because it's like, I can't imagine the way I think it might happen, because everything feels, people use the word unprecedented too much, but I think that it is precedented in the sense that scientists have been talking about this for a long time. But it's starting to feel unprecedented to a lot of people, right? So I think that, and of course what's happening, we know this, is that the global south is sort of the people of the global south are the ones that are most exploited and most extracted from, including their countries and their resources. So they're being hit first exponentially before the global north, right? So all of that to say is that I think in approaching the page and in thinking about language and in thinking about futurity, I think it reshapes how we make things during the climate crisis. It's not as simple to say, for example, 20 years from now, blah, 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 and the characters meet and they do. And I'm like, yeah, they may meet, but they may be wearing hazmat suits. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely.
right,
Absolutely.
right. So I just wanted to sort of throw that out there and see if it provokes anything in you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being a poet and being a MC has shaped my writing in a way that I think again I'm grateful for. As an MC, imagery and metaphors and being futuristic when it came to like text and language has always been the thing. How do we evolve the language? What is a different way we can say the thing that we've already heard? And so that idea has always just, again, been part of my approach to text. And I think that also is an approach to the way I create characters, the way I create worlds. One of the latest pieces that I wrote, Rise Beans, it's all about what you're talking about. It's about a BIPOC community that, and the last 3 days of the world. due to climate change, right? I know I'm very well versed in climate change and in hurricanes and flooding, and being prepared for that stuff. So that's always been disasters. Have always been natural disasters. Have always been part of my lifestyle, and adaptation to that lifestyle. You know, so right when I moved to Miami, I encountered Hurricane Andrew. And so we spent a month and a half without electricity and figuring out how to eat and figuring out how to, you know, wait to go to school and how to live in that kind of world, right? So I think all of that has always been part of my practice, and kind of like the ideas have been swirling around my head for a very long time, you know. Reading, you know, Octavia Butler, or reading 1984, reading, you know, watching Brazil, the movie, like all of these things have always been, again, you know, 12 Monkeys, but you know, like all of these, I say things that I was consuming were kind of like of that world. I think now we're in a different place where like technology gives us access to that information in a different way. But I think that's been having those conversations and those ideas and those thoughts. And to answer, you know, to think about what you're saying, hearing you talk about like, yeah, how do you approach the page and say it's spring, and you're like, is spring ever coming again? You know, obviously it's horrifying. It's also sad, intimidating, you know, and also then how do you adapt? How do you then what do you write about? Then where do you turn? And then I think that opens up different possibilities, different opportunities, different worlds, or maybe the world we want to see or the world we want to imagine. And also, or just writing it, there is no more spring. That being something that is then documented as well, right? And so, yeah, those are some thoughts that are coming to mind.
Sure. Thank you. I wanted to talk about Miami, sort of central to your art making and development as an artist, and it's a city with many. How shall I put it? It's a city with many people know it, I think, from the beach, and they know it, you know, from the world of fashion and the world of visual art, to some extent music, but less so around theater and performance, which feels, I remember maybe about, oh my heavens, maybe 10 years ago, I was at a theater conference and they were saying Miami is the new New York for theater. And I was like, really? When is that happening? I mean, if it happens, that's amazing. I can't wait. But then it sort of didn't happen. And so I guess I'm just wondering about, you know, I started writing when I was in Miami. I lived in Hialeah for a time as an adolescent, and it's where I first started writing, but I only started writing plays because a teacher told me that might be something I'd be good at. And I had no way of seeing theater. Like, it was like, I mean, there was some theater, but it was like, you know, unaffordable, or, you know, like touring productions or whatever, or just not on my radar. And so I just read a lot of stuff. Basically, I encountered plays on the page because that's all I knew, or recordings, right? Like the audio recordings, cast albums, or even just radio plays. I love radio plays, FYI. I think they're amazing because you have access immediately. It's like so cool. So I think that, but you know, Miami there is a thriving art scene in Miami and performance scene in Miami, and I think that. So I'd love for you to just, I don't want you to be like ambassador of Miami, but I just want you to kind of talk to us a little bit about and contextualize that performance scene a little bit through your coming up through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the best breaking crews in the world come from Miami, right? my crew being one of them, Flipside Kings, Street Masters, Ground Zero. You know, Barry Jenkins is from me. Terrell Allen McCraney is from Miami. Marco Ramirez is from Miami. Rosie Herrera, one of the greatest American choreographers, is from Miami. Leone Garcia, Teo Castellanos. I mean, you mentioned visual art, right? Lebo, Purvis Young, right? You know, and even if we talk about, I mean, even some of the best dancers, right? Like New World School of the Arts breeds some of the best dancers, right? A lot of the Ailey dancers are from Miami. A lot of the Graham dancers are from Miami, that trained at New World School of the Arts. And even if we go back to, like, you know, when Overtown was a vibrant, they called it the Harlem of the South, right? You have Betty Wright is from Overtown. Clarence Reed is from Overtown, right? This is where Etta James, James Brown, like these people used to come to Overtown to perform, right? Like the history is rich and vast and maybe not as huge as like these bigger cities, but very strong, very potent, very inspiring, and then you also have like cultural workers like Beth Boone from Miami Light Project, Rebecca Langle, like Esther Park, people who have been creating experiences, opportunities, and atmospheres for many years. So, you know, but the way Miami is pitched and promoted in the commercial world, right, is we all know is very much of like the beach and fun and clubs and the night scene and whatnot. But yeah, I was lucky to you know, my first teacher was Teo Castellanos, playwright, director, actor, performance poet, a punk rock band member who performed at Churchill's, one of the oldest, like, you know, nightclubs ever in Miami, and who won the first Fringe Award at the Edinburgh Festival for his play Northeast Second Ave, right? So yeah, there's a lot of history, and I think a lot of these people have also inspired the way that many of these crafts work when it comes to like writing, when it comes to dance, and people might not know that they're actually watching somebody who was inspired by Barry Jenkins, somebody who was inspired by Terrell Alvin McCraney, someone who was inspired by Rosie Herrera's work, someone who was inspired by Teo Castellanos' work, right? Because again, these well, if we talk about Teo when he was doing what he was doing, we're talking about mid 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. And that performance circuit was different, right? Like you actually had to travel, like how you just said, you actually had to travel to conferences and events to go encounter these people and actually, which to be honest, I miss, right? Like to travel to like gather history, gather information, leave the village, go see the world and come back with this newfound wisdom, you know? Which I loved, right? And so you had to like be in the scene to know what was happening. You had to know that there was a thing called the NPN, the National Performers Network, and they were in a conference. And during that conference, you were going to see, somebody like Universes or somebody like Benji Reed or Lemon Anderson or Mark Bamuti, and how that work was going to inspire your work and how your work was going to inspire their work. And when I came into theater, that's literally what I came into, right? Like that kind of community. And so it was vibrant and beautiful, and it's still vibrant. You know, I'm always inspired by the artists, by the young artists or the new artists that I meet in Miami, and keeping in mind that I think Miami has this like special energy. It's just like this, its vastness or its light does something to for your creativity. That I don't think I've experienced in other places, you know. But I mean, I really could talk about Miami for
forever. Miami forever.
Forever, yeah.
I want to read that play.
Yeah, but I will say, yeah, it is. All the people that I've encountered in Miami, I bring with me to the page. I bring with me to every stage. I bring with me to every room I create work in. You know.
Yeah, cool. I want you, obviously you mentioned Terrell McCraney, who's obviously incredibly important in your life for many reasons. One from the Miami art scene, but also at Yale, where they were one of your mentors. And I wanted to touch on that part of your life. I know it's fairly recent. You've been performing for a long time and doing many things, and suddenly you're like, I'm at Yale School of Drama. Oh, is it called the Guffin? Sorry, the Geffen School of Drama.
I still call it.
Yale Geffen School of Drama.
Yeah.
And there you are, sort of as an MFA playwright, a very different kind of atmosphere, certainly way of approaching training. And you've just come out of that, and so I'm just wondering, with a little bit of reflection that you've had in your time there, how has that affected your process and thinking about making maybe even works you've made that you may not have made before that you made there. So I'm curious about that environment and how it shook you up, if it did at all.
Yeah, no. Oof, so many things to say. Well, I will share this. I met Terrell in 2003, at the same time that I met Teo Castellanos. Teo was Terrell's mentor when he was a teenager, and he did a lot of theater and theater training with Will. So when I got into Teo's company in 2003, Terrell was a company member by default, because they had been creating, Theater Sense, which that theater company is called Teo Castellanos D Projects. So I've known Terrell since then. We've been friends since then. We've been collaborators since then. We've, been talking about art and words for 20 plus years, right? I will say that, now a year out, I graduated last May, a year out. Obviously, there's been a lot of unraveling that has been happening throughout that year. But more and more, I realize how lucky I was to be part of the Terrell McCraney era of the playwriting program. I think it was very special. The first year that I applied 2 years to get into the school. I got in the second year, but the first year that I applied, they only take in 3 playwrights each year. The first year that I applied, those 3 playwrights that got into the school was the first year that all 3 playwrights were people of color getting into that school, right? The year after I got in was the first time that all the playwriting program, online playwrights, were BIPOC playwrights, right? Which has never happened in the history of the playwriting program at Yale, right? And so we had, and so again, I think that, Terrell and leading the program along with Ann Irby did a wonderful job of bringing in, specific voices that I don't think would have been in that space if it wasn't for them tag teaming and thinking about the kind of community that they want to create, and the kind of theater that they want to support, and the kind of theater, the kind of artists that they want to usher into the field, right? And so I was very lucky to be part of that. When I think about the writers that came out of that time, right? I'm just like, yeah, it's very special, and I do imagine years from now that people will be like, yeah, from this year to this year, these writers were part of that era, of those years, right? I'm excited for what's to happen, now with Marcus Gardley stepping into the role as co-chair along with Ann Irby. But I do think that I was part of a very special time, and I'm appreciative for that. And let me see, what else? Yeah.
I just wonder what kinds of at Yale. I'm assuming this. I don't know for a fact, so maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming that you have to have a play that you're working on, or more than one play that you're working on, that's created perhaps in that environment,
Yeah.
or that you've come within, obviously, in some way, shape, or form. So I wonder, like, what pieces you actually made while you were there, as opposed to plays or pieces that you brought with you in your portfolio.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was very interesting and also very difficult, very complex, also very exciting, right? Everyone is in a different place, uh, department-wise, and everyone is in a different place in their learning process. So you're working with people who have never created new work. You're working with people who are still learning how to act. You're working with people who are still learning how to direct. You know, you're getting people who don't want to do new work, who just want to do the classics, right? Um, uh, you're working with people who probably don't even love the craft as much as you love the craft, they just want to be famous, right? They're just like, I'm just here to for the famous, like I'm not, they're not of the craft in a way that which I quickly realized, right? Where I thought, oh, I'm going to this, I'm going to this place, everyone loves theater the way I do. I was like, oh no, I quickly learned that is not true, right? And that not everyone wants to create the kind of theater that I love to create, but also love to experience, right? You know, I am also, I never went to school for theater. I never went to school for writing. I never went to school for dancing. I learned everything through practicing. I quickly realized I realized I always knew this, but obviously being in the institution for 4 years straight, it's even that much more apparent that there's a difference between being classically trained and being culturally trained, right? And what that does in a room, right? And what that does to the work, and the way you create work and the way you experience work. I also I feel that Western theater pedagogy needs a diaper change, right? Like I think we need to embrace new ways, new practices, new containers, new ideas, new training methods, and old training methods, ancient technologies that never even made it to the Western theater pedagogy in the first place due to, patriarchy and racist and prejudice practices, right? So, maneuvering that is difficult when you're creating the kind of work you're creating and people are learning in different ways. But I think it does teach you or taught me at least, how to relay information, how to share information in different ways, to try to make people see what it is that I am trying to do with the work, to also give people some kind of different work to look at, and experience, and to get them to understand that there is also validity in it, right? And that this is not the only way. And again, I think going back to being part of this Roma Crane era, is that we were, as writers, we were, during our time there, we were encouraged to dream and dream the impossible, and dream big. Like one of my first classes was Sarah Rule, who is also a great friend and a mentor, became a mentor of mine. I clinged on to like as quickly as possible. Like one of our first classes with her was like, write an impossible play, write the impossible play, right? And what is an impossible play, right? Like when you think that you're writing this thing and then you realize, oh, actually we could make this happen with theater magic, right? But so I was lucky to be part of, I guess, be encouraged in that way. I thought I was going to come in and it was going to be very much like, this is how you write a play. This is the right way to write a play. This is a well-structured play. This is a well-made play. A play has to, and it was very opposite of that, which I'm grateful for. I have a rebellious spirit, and I honor it often. so I was just like, oh, what is this gonna be like? I'm kind of ready for it all, right? But yeah.
I hear you. Can you talk a little bit about specific plays of yours that you wish to highlight? I think that, we have probably an audience, whoever's out there, that may not know your work at all. So I think that, give us a taste of like, this play next to that play, next to that way, that piece, so just to get a sense of your work. Yeah.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. The play that I wrote to get into the program, it's a play called Little Boy, Little Man. It's about two Nicaraguan brothers growing up in Miami. They're half brothers. One of them is both Latinx Nicaraguan immigrants. One of them is white passing. The other is Afro-Nicaraguan. And so even though they share the experience of being immigrants, they're having a different experience because of the color of their skin in this country. The younger brother is a street performer who has big dreams of many things, and the other brother, his dream is just to conform and to assimilate, and he believes that becoming an American citizen is his way of getting rid of the prejudice and the racism and that he encountered throughout his life. And so he feels that if he becomes an American citizen and he changes his name, all of that will go away. The history that he carries with him from his family and from his past, right? The play is very much like a street performance. It is immersive. It's in the round. It consists of movement, live music. There's a drummer and a bass guitarist on stage the whole time. The brother, who is a street performer, he's actually a poet. So there's a lot of poetry and spoken word in the piece. There's a lot of crowd interaction throughout the piece, which are very much staples in my work. I'm always thinking about how to create a space that is as much for the audience as it is for the performers. I'm always thinking about how do we close this gap that exists between like the stage and the watchers, right? So it feels very strange to ignore 300 plus people who are sitting right in front of you. But it's where I guess the way I came up, the way I got into art, the way I got into dance, like it just always been that kind of practice for me. So, and I am a big believer that all theater is immersive and all theater is site specific. And this like splitting up of theaters, they just need to categorize it in some shape or form to make sense of a thing. But for me, it's all immersive. So those things are staples in my work. I wrote a show there called Green Sugar Blues, which is about two 10-year-old Afro-Latinas growing up in Carol City who decide to rob a bank when one of their fathers has a heart attack. I wrote, let me see, what did I write? I wrote a play called While We Wait, which is it kind of moves like the changing of TV channels on stage. There's a lot of like parodies, satire, commercials, scenes, monologues, and it is a ritual, a ceremony for and the mourning of lives that have passed and lives that will pass, and also a celebration, an ode, to the lives that have passed, very specific people in my life. And again, very immersive, very in the round, 5 chairs on stage, five performers, right? I wrote, let me see, what else? I wrote Rice and Beans. I wrote the first draft of Rice and Beans that I talked about earlier, which was kind of like I was working on as my thesis, and to do like my Carlotta, which is Carlotta Festival. For those who don't know, is the Carlotta Festival is a festival of new works that Yale does, the playwriting program, or the whole department does every year. For the graduating playwrights, they write a play, or they bring a play that they want to do, and it's basically like your biggest play there, right? It's like your thesis. It's like your graduating play, and you work on it with all the departments, all the designers, the actors, everyone comes together, and you get a budget of sorts and support in a way that the other plays that you write don't. They're just kind of like studio workshops or smaller workshop productions. But during the Carlotta Festival, you have a quote unquote professional production, and it's open to the public, and it runs for 2 weekends of 2 weeks, and anyone can come and buy tickets and see it. But that's what I wrote Rice and Beans for, because we're talking about like the kind of work I was creating before I got there, and the kind of work I was writing when I was there. I think that Rice and Beans was I was trying some of the things that I was picking up there, and I was like, I've never been like a big monologue person, and I was like, well, let's see what monologues feel like, and I can use them, and what are the different styles of monologues that I'm attracted to, and how I can implement them into the work that I was telling you that I just explained, right? Like this immersive world, this like crowd participation world, right? And so I was just playing with some of the stuff that we were picking up during our time there.
Yeah, super interesting. This is fascinating. So the monologue world. I wanted to just add something to this, which is, of course, you're a performer as well. So did you find yourself in a position where you were like, but I want to play that part? and people were like, no, it should be like the MFA actor who has to play this part because it's part of their training. So how did you negotiate that conundrum?
Yeah, I will say I do miss performing. I haven't, I performed the last show I did as a show called Fito, which is kind of a spring off of the Little Boy, Little Man show. The younger brother's name is Fito. So I wrote a show just specifically about him and his experience about becoming an American citizen after 30 years in the country. It was commissioned by the Fisher Center, and I performed it at the Fisher Center at the bottom of 2019, right before the pandemic. So I haven't performed since then, and so I will say I do miss it. And I don't think I ever had the want to perform like in during school, or like in any of the productions that I was like working on. I think more so I wanted to collaborate, right? And like inspire and encourage collaboration in a different way, right? Where again, I came into theater through a very specific way, and it was very collaborative and it was very communal. So I knew the fact that I wasn't going to be the quiet playwright in the room, because I am a dancer, because I'm a choreographer, because I've directed, because I've performed. I have a lot of information that I can share, right? So finding ways to do that, but also finding ways to leave space for collaborators to bring themselves to it, and finding ways for them to learn, right? Because I understand that I came into the program, I was 38 when I went into the program, and I had been performing for 20 years. So my experience was different, right? Like I went there, my experience was way different. So and it's great to watch people step into those roles and to watch people grow throughout the years and take on these beautiful crafts that they are honing while they're at the space.
Yeah, super cool, and thanks for responding to that. I didn't realize you hadn't really performed since 2019, which feels like a long time to not be performing. So maybe it will come back at some point. I wanted to shift to a question that I sometimes ask. I don't always ask it, but I sometimes ask this question about dreams that you have for the field, and what does that look like? Again, maybe this dovetails into the question that we began with, which has to do with the climate crisis, but how do you dream, right? How do you dream at a time that feels that is restricting dreaming on a number of levels, including political ones. Very scary. So yeah. So I think that what are the dreams for the field that you have?
Oh man, yeah. Before I answer that, I'm thinking about the first question you asked, and I think also, we all know that climate change affects poor people, women and children, Black and brown people the most, right? And so I think that, apocalypse has always been part of those communities, those communities' lives, right? And so I think that radical hope, radical dreaming, radical love has always been part of my life, and again, part of my practice. And I would say that, yeah, those are things that come to mind when I think about things for the field, like what dreams do I have? And I would say radical dreaming, radical hope, radical love, putting those things into practice. This is very selfish of me, but I would love for audiences to start. I would love for, I'm always thinking about, like, what are ways that we can get the audience to, like, experience theater in the way that they experience visual art, right? The way they engage with visual art, the way that they engage with an aquarium, right? Rather than like this, like, I think that there's just like a difference when, like, theater audiences sit down to watch a thing, something happens to the brain where it becomes, like, highly critical and it's like, I'm like, it's the bane of my existence, and it's also like what drives my practice of, like, how do we get them to turn that off and just experience that, right? So I wish that for the field, to start thinking of theater as more of an experience, a destination. I think it's, for me, theater can be anywhere and exist at any moment, as opposed to, like, it can only happen in said building, in said way, right? So what all the ways that theater can happen, right? Is a question that I would love to propose and encourage people to answer. What are all the ways that we can experience theater? And again, how can we close this gap between, like, performer and audience is something that I think is an important question, and that not only for writers, but for actors, directors, for artistic directors, right? How do we close the gap between artists and theater goer? How do we close the gap between institution and community? How do we I guess my dreams are questions, actually, for the field.
The questions. Can we do this? I don't know. Maybe. Oh, I know. Yeah, it's hard. I wanted to. I know we're almost out of time, but I just wanted to lift up this because you've mentioned it several times, so I want to bring this up. You talk a lot about closing the gap between the audience and the experience and immersiveness and so forth, but you also mentioned visual art, and so one of the things about visual art is that the audience has agency, usually, over how they experience the work. And it's not always time-based, i.e. you can watch it on your own time as you wander through the gallery or through the public park or through whatever the artwork that you're in dialogue with or regarding. There are time-based pieces like video pieces, etc. But you can also, like, come and go. You know what I mean? So I think I think the conundrum with theater, not a conundrum that I am particularly fond of, is that a lot of theater insists on the primacy of, no, the audience doesn't have agency, in fact, that the agency belongs to the makers and the institution, and the audience is there to kind of play by their rules, which is totally fine. Like, it is a way of making, like, totally fine if that's the way you want to do it. But actually, I've become, and maybe that's just me, maybe I'm just the weirdo who's very interested in asynchronous experiences, but because I think it's closer to the visual art experience. So when I experience a piece of visual art on my own time, with big people, by myself, however that happens, the art is not telling me how to experience it. The art is there, it exists, it is on a wall, it's in the floor, it's on a video screen, however it manifests, and I have to kind of figure my way out around it. The immersion is happening by the audience. It's not happening by the artwork necessarily, not always, unless it's a garden or a labyrinth, or there are many different kinds of art, right? So, and so I just think about this question of like, one of the challenges I think our field faces is that it continually, this is a blanket statement, so forgive me. But it continually tends to not understand this, that it continually tends to say, yes, the audience has agency, but only by our rules. And so I think that actually doesn't make change possible, because you actually have to rethink your relationship to how an audience might experience the work. And especially, so let's just think about building-based work for a second. There are many buildings, as we know, that have historically not welcomed people into their buildings, right? And so why would I go there? Do you know what I mean? Like, from an audience perspective, you'd be like, I don't know, why should I show up to that place that has never wanted me to be there in the first place, right? So to then, like, behave by their rules, like, which there's an aspect to, and it's something that I'm wrestling with a lot in terms of the theater industry, but also the way the way a lot of things behave and function. Because there are a lot of aspects of surveillance and policing that are part of the theater experience. And Kirsty Sedgman, I don't know if you know Kirsty's work, but Kirsty is a scholar who writes about audiences. And she talks about that we have to cultivate an unreasonableness in theater spaces, that actually reasonableness is killing us, because it has to do with, it has to do with policing and surveillance. So I'm just throwing that out there to see if it resonates in any way, shape, or form.
Yes, it all resonates. And for the last 12 years, I've been in many passionate discussions with organizations and artistic directors of, like, from the simplest thing to, like, do we really need to do this curtain speech? Right? Like, do I really need to do this Q&A? Like, like, also, do they need to, can some people stand? Can we put chairs over here? Do they have to be lined up? Like, always being that person ask the question that they are hoping a person not to ask, because they have implemented a very strict or specific schedule, space, or, like how you said, surveillance, policing, right? Like that. Again, it's like, how are we welcoming the audience into this space, right? I mean, so many of the things that you say are, and it makes me just think of, like, how I think often people use the word, like, the field and the industry, and theater and theaters, and I think we have to understand and be, remind ourselves that there's a difference between in the industry and the art makers and the theater makers and the artists, right? And the art itself, right? Like, we often, we all believe that a show should be 90 minutes. Like, that's also, like, wait a minute, it's 2 hours? Wait a minute, it's only 45 minutes? Wait a minute, like, I'm like, who did that? Who told us that 90 minutes was what a show needs to be? You know what I mean? Like, who made that? And I constantly question that, right? Who told us that we can't react? Who told us that we can't scream in the middle of a show? Who told us that we can't stand? And that's the kind of world, those are the worlds that I come from, where, you know, where people react, where people shout, where people have agency, where people are eating, where people are drinking. You know, I hosted cabaret nightclub events for many years, right? It bleeds into the work, right? So, I mean, to answer your question, yes, I all that stuff resonates, and if I start talking,
Oh, I have.
but I
Yeah.
will say, I think that there's a difference between in the industry, commercialism, capitalism, and packaging things up to sell them at a specific time, in a specific way, at a specific pace, and then art, you know, and plays and writing and acting, and those are all, you know, those are two different worlds, you know. But I think that's, you know, if I to answer your last question, you know, my dreams are for the artists, and for you know, for the people who support the artists and want to create the things that the artists are creating, you know, to embrace radical imagination, you know, radical creativity, to embrace partnership and diversity, to cultivate decentralized leadership. Yeah, would be some of the things that I dream of, and would love for the field.
Cool.
And of course, grace and compassion and love, right?
Yes, which we need. We're in dire need of, and a lot of fight, I think, too. You know, in times, geopolitical times that are where the global far right is increasing, and authoritarianism is very appealing to many people. You know, I think that, you know, one of the industry's jobs actually is to actually be resistant and fight back, and not play, which I think has become. This is, again, another blanket statement, forgive me, theater world, to say that I think that there is a clinging to, out of a survival tactic, there is a clinging to, well, if the work is irrelevant, it won't offend anyone, and therefore it will survive the regime. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's actually the opposite needs to happen, which I know is very scary and is risky, right? And is, you know, people are in precarity and are worried about their bottom line, right? When everything's falling apart. But I actually think, go down fighting. Go down fighting. Please don't go down by making something that's irrelevant, because that only helps fascism move forward. And this is something that really, really concerns me about how people are programming, and even thinking about how they program, because it's stemming from capitalism. It's stemming from the precarity conversation, the forced precarity, by the way, because the wealth gap is so enormous, and the U.S.'s art subsidy is non-existent, and so I think that it's created, so it's doubled. It's like capitalism plus fascism, and so what I see a lot of, you know, not all places and not all organizations, and not, you know, but this is just something I've been noticing. A sort of, well, if we just make work that kind of just gets by, do you know what I mean? And I'm just like, why would you do that? Yeah. Why would you do, like, literally, why? Like, literally, like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, today I want to make something very mediocre. Like, really, that's what you're saying, you know? And I'm just like, I don't actually understand that concept. Like, I find that conceptually strange. And also, if just think about it, it's like really bonkers, right? So, you know, so I think instead of making something that's inspiring, or like, you know, an inspiration can come in many ways. It can be, you know, it can be, I'm not, you know, I used the word offense before, but there is work that's offensive and angry and all the things. There's also work that operates in different modes, but it's not like, I'm just gonna get by, you know. So it's just something that I just want to, like, again, throw it out there as part of radical imagination, is that it's tied to this idea of like how to also make work that is about resistance. to regimes, ways of thought that are trying to squash how we dream and how we imagine.
Yeah, no, totally. I agree. I ask the question all the time, you know, if you're losing money doing the thing you think is going to make you money, then why not lose money doing something new, doing something that you haven't done, right? And taking the chance, right? And then also, how are we opening up spaces and opportunities for new artists, for new directors, get the opportunity to direct, you know, on a certain scale, or new actors and or actors to create their career, or new writers, new playwrights, right? Like how are we creating those opportunities for new people if we're holding on to these old ways, or these old or what we think is the work that is going to you know, help your institution survive, you know? So
which brings me back to the question of what are you preserving? You know what I mean? It's like, you know, a lot of white supremacy is about preserving itself, right? And I think that it's like, and I think the question always needs to be, is that worth preserving?
Yeah.
Like, you know, like this is the way it's always been done, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, but wait, hold on, backtrack. Why are you preserving that? Like, what is it doing culturally? How is it, like, you know, engaging with your community? Like, or is it just perpetuating itself?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's the other part of the conundrum in our industry at large.
It makes me think of the term standard practice. And we're like, oh, it's standard practice. And I'm like, but does that mean it's right? Does that mean it's good? Does that mean it's exciting? You know, like, I'm like, standard practice just means you have a routine, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then, like, what is it? Can we try another practice? You know, like, let's try a different way, right? So yeah, no, I agree. I uplift that, and I hear you loud and clear, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Just want to give some fighting chances out there to any audience that may be listening, to like keep fighting, to keep the faith, and to not despair. And I think a time which I mean, you should be despairing, actually. I think I want to honor that space of despair, which I think is really important. And I think that our society, especially in the US, tries to smooth over and not deal with. But I think sit in that despair, and through that find the ways that are about fighting back and about resistance, which I know is very hard when you're thinking about where your next paycheck is going to come from, and where your next meal might be coming from or not coming from. You know, but I think that it's important to kind of tease that out, because I think that we're in a culture at large. Also, it's global. You know, it's technocratic, libertarian. There's a lot of, you know, sort of shapers and movers out there that are trying to make the dreaming space more and more difficult for us, and more narrow. In other words, more narrow, more provincial, more parochial dreaming space, when it shouldn't be. And I think that it takes every ounce of us as artists to counter that, and to not get sucked into a space that is narrow in kind. So I'll leave it on that note. I want to thank you, Rudi, so much for being my guest, and for being so warm and so effusive and generous about your thought and practice. For those of you that are watching or have been following this series, you know that what I always do is do a wave and a so long, but I also stay offline with my guests afterwards, after I hit end recording, to do a little chat. If you haven't been to the series before, this is your first time encountering us, please check it out. The seasons that you can just watch and experience, listen to, however you're experiencing this, and listen to some wonderful, wonderful art makers thinking deeply about their craft, and a multitude, a myriad ways, I should say, a truth to the notion that there isn't a standard practice. So I'll circle back on that. Thank you so much, Rudi. I'm going to do my little wave. Goodbye, everyone, and more soon in Conversations from the Alcove.